ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips, trends, and what's new in the world of ColdFusion today. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Mary Jo Sminkey, and she is speaking at CFObjective on advanced error handling strategies for ColdFusion, JavaScript, and SQL Server. So we're going to be looking in this episode why everyone listening should be doing error logging, what you can do for ColdFusion error logging, for JavaScript and Ajax error logging, and SQL Server error logging, and strategies you can use for debugging errors on a live site. We'll look at some open source and third-party solutions for error logging, and how you can use site analytics to track and fix issues on a live site. Also, we'll look at some full-stack application performance management tools you may not have used yet that are really handy. So welcome, Mary Jo.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, so let's start off with the 64,000-pound elephant in the room, because I bet not everyone listening is doing error logging, and why should they be doing it?
Well, basically, when you get customers from emails from your customers or your clients, usually they have absolutely no detail. They just say your website sucks, it's broken, I can't check out. They give you no detail at all. If you've ever tried to get some details from your customers, it usually fails miserably. So my goal has always been, how can I get enough information about what's happening for the users on the website that I can debug those errors without having to ask them for help, because they are going to be absolutely no help at all. So in the old days, a lot of us would just check ColdFusion error logs or email the CFer dump to ourselves. But our applications have gotten a lot more complicated. There's a lot more components to it. And so this is often not enough information. So my goal has been to continually, gradually, incrementally improve what I'm doing for not just my error logging, but the way I notify myself of errors, what's included in that information, and how I can collect enough information about what's going on that I can figure out what the problem is and fix it.
Okay, so sounds like it's a good thing to be logging errors. And dumb question here, why not just use the default error screen where it displays the error on the screen?
Well, that's going to again appear for the client. It's only going to dump out a certain small amount of information from the ColdFusion error. It may not include everything that happened up to that problem to cause that problem. It's not going to include all your different scopes of information that you need. And it's going to rely on that user actually sending you that error. Whereas a lot of times they're just going to say, screw this site, I'm going to go shop somewhere else where I don't have a problem. So not only do we need to show them a friendly error and let them know that, okay, we're aware there's a problem and we need to fix it, but we need a way to collect all the information of what happened to cause that error. And it's even a lot more complicated these days, because a lot of times there's several steps that led up to that error occurring that we want to know about as well.
And also in modern applications, there may well be a whole bunch of JavaScript code that ColdFusion error display isn't going to capture either. And we'll
exactly. That error may happen in an Ajax call as part of that, and the user's not even going to see anything. They're just going to have a big spinning wheel on their website because something's not able to finish, and they'll just be like, I don't know what to do.
Right. So, it sounds like you've been doing error logging for a long time. Do you have any idea how many more errors it captures versus just assuming your users are going to tell you about errors? Is it like 10 times as many or 100 times as many? Or?
Oh, probably millions, to be honest, these days. If you start logging your JavaScript errors, you're probably going to find a lot of stuff that you're not really necessarily going to be able to fix. But you can capture what errors are occurring the most, and particularly when you push out new changes in your code, you find out which, if you have a particular bug in your code, or with some of these error logging systems, you'll be able to filter by the particular browser that they're using. So if you're not doing real good full stack testing of your applications, you might be able to see, okay, I've got a issue here on IE7 that I didn't test for, and I might need to fix that. So yeah, I mean, you'll just get a lot more errors, but obviously it's going to depend on how much that you do in terms of how you log your errors, what you're going to log, and what you've done previously to doing that.
And is this something we should only be doing on public sites, or you should do it on intranets and enterprise systems as well?
I pretty much do it on everything. And in fact, I even use it a lot of times in my dev systems because it's going to provide all that scope information in terms of what caused my error that you might not be able to easily get just from the ColdFusion dump on the screen. And particularly with some of the JavaScript errors as well, you're going to get a little bit more information out of the system.
So let's start with looking at ColdFusion error logging. How do you suggest people do that? Is that a try-catch or a CFer or something else? Or?
Well, I actually did a presentation at CFobjective a couple years ago, and I started doing a series of blog articles that went out on my full-scale error handler that I use. And the number of things that I do with it, one is that I dump out all the different scopes that are available. A lot of times if I'm debugging a particular error that occurs inside a CFC, I'll even take my local scope and copy that into request scope inside my CF catch, so I have access to that data as well. And then I have a whole notification process that happens with that, so that let's say I do something on my website that causes a infinite loop. I don't want to suddenly get millions of errors being emailed to me. So it keeps track in application scope of errors that have already been sent to me by email, and it only notifies me if it starts seeing multiples of those come through. So that way I don't get an email for every single instance of an error that occurs. And what I did...
That's really smart, and that was always the problem I had with these.
Well, that's what a lot of developers are not paying attention to, their ColdFusion errors, even if they do have an email notification system, because they get too many of them and they just want to read through them all. So by just doing something as simple as keeping track of which ones you've already emailed yourself that day, and only emailing if you start getting lots of multiples, so that you do know if there's a problem occurring and you suddenly get multiples, it makes it a lot easier to take care of these errors and not let them pile up. So that's just something simple like that can really help you in terms of your error management. So that used to be all I did, but then one of the issues we have on our current site is we have certain errors that we know occur frequently. We don't have control of the database, and they house their database on a completely other end of the country from the website. So we tend to get timeouts, and that's just something we can't really do anything about other than make sure we don't get lots and lots of them. Then we know there's a problem. So I don't really care about getting email notifications for database timeouts, so I started integrating into this system lists of errors that I don't want to get notified about. But it's important that if something does happen where I need to go back and take a look at a specific error, I need to have them logged somewhere so I can see how many of these are we getting per day. Is there a particular one that I do need to investigate a little closer? So if I'm not emailing them to myself, I want them still logged somewhere. So that's where we started looking at logging these errors as they occur. Likewise, there's other places where I use my email handler within CF catches, and a lot of times I just want to catch that error, log it. I don't really need to get notified about it for that particular reason, because I know that that's something I've already handled, but I do want to know about that error again so we can keep track of how often these are occurring and if there's some other way that we can handle them. So logging gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of what you can do with your errors, so that you don't have to be dumping them all out into email or into logs or other types of tools, but you can still collect data on them and see how much certain types of errors are occurring.
That sounds like a clever way of doing it, Mary Jo. So do you have any other things you do with CF errors? Do you say you're emailing them, but are you also sticking them in a log file or somewhere else? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, that obviously a lot of the CF errors will automatically get logged by the CF system, the logging system it uses, but we're now using a third-party logging system for all our errors, and I dump my CF errors into that as well. So the same one that I use for JavaScript errors is the same one that I log my ColdFusion errors into.
What's the third-party logging system you use?
The one that we're using now is called BugSnag, and it's specifically built to handle lots of different types of error logging. It can log if you do mobile apps, it can log those. It's got a specific JavaScript notifier. And what's cool about it is if you can send out something via a REST call, you can log it in there. You can create your own collector basically for something in it. And prior to using BugSnag, we used BugLog HQ, which is a open source ColdFusion tool for logging errors. It's really quite nice. And as far as I know, that's still out there and available to use. And that as well, you don't have to use it only for ColdFusion errors, but it is specifically built for ColdFusion errors. And again, it can use just a REST call. So you just collect all the data you want to send into it. And I just built that into my whole ColdFusion global error handler as part of, if I'm going to email it or if I'm going to log it or if I'm going to do both, I just collect all that data, parse it out to a JSON, and then send it to BugLog or to BugSnag, whichever notifier that's collecting that data.
So BugSnag is a way of collecting bugs, a kind of bug tracking database app. Is that right? Or?
Yes, basically. So it's a third-party system. I think they do have a free version you can use to a certain degree. We do pay for the service because of the amount that we use it. And the nice thing, too, is when you use these logging systems like BugSnag or BugLog HQ, generally they have an email subscription service as well in terms of how often you want to get notified of your errors. And if you're working in a company where different developers are working on the projects, it's nice that they can be able to handle themselves which projects they want to subscribe to, getting bug notifications from, and then when they're done working on that project, they can unsubscribe from those. And you can customize often how you want to get notified. You can get notifications the first time a bug happens or for every X number of instances of that bug. In BugSnag, you can mark bugs as fixed, and then if that bug occurs again, be re-notified of it. You can get a daily digest of all the bugs. It'll notify you if a certain project is suddenly seeing a big increase in bugs, which is nice to know about it when you're pushing out new releases. It'll let you know if there's a sudden increase in errors occurring. So there's a lot that these systems can do. And then a lot of the data is searchable as well. So if I have a particular customer complaining of errors, I can look up their IP address in my bug system and find out, are there any errors logged for that particular user?
Oh, well, that's nice. So you can, if they manually notify you they're having problems, you can then go in and see all the stuff that's been happening for that particular person.
Yes, correct.
Great. Well, that sounds really handy. So you also mentioned you track errors in JavaScript. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so there's a number of things that we do now. Again, all our JavaScript errors get sent to BugSnag automatically. You basically just have a little include that you put on your site, and it'll automatically send any JavaScript errors that occur to the BugSnag system. So that's the first thing that we do. Where we really had to work on how we were going to capture bugs was in our Ajax calls. For one thing, we're calling ColdFusion on the back end, but then it's integrating into this Ajax call. We need to figure out what's going on in there, what data is being sent to ColdFusion, and still handle it on a friendly way for the user. So I kind of do a integration of BugSnag along with ColdFusion, where I'm using the session to kind of track what's occurring in the Ajax layer on the ColdFusion side, and then sending out that whole structure to BugSnag when an error occurs. So in my Ajax error handling, I'm doing a call out to BugSnag where I collect all that ColdFusion data and then send that out as part of the error trapping inside the Ajax call. And then I just present a friendly error to the user.
Oh, so they actually get to know there's an error happening instead of the thing just spinning away there.
Yes, exactly. And I have our Ajax, since we do tend to have these database timeouts, I basically do 3 attempts on any Ajax call if it's timing out, to give it, a couple extra tries, make sure if there's just a timeout issue, and that'll usually be enough. But if it fails on the 3rd attempt, then it's going to log the error out and then notify the user that there was a problem. And then again, if they notify me of that, then what I can do is I can take that IP address, look it up in BugSnag, and then what I'm going to find is this whole big structure that tells me, here's the Ajax request that was happening, and here's whatever I logged in terms of my ColdFusion. And I may log just the request to the Ajax, or I may log the response, or I may just log, was it a success, or was there a timeout, or what happened that caused it to fail. That's all going to be part of this ColdFusion structure. And then I often bring in metrics on the user as well, what browser they were on, all that kind of stuff that can often be a part of what's happening in terms of your errors. What OS and browser they were on is usually the most important stuff, where they logged in at the time. And then the other thing that I do that has become a real important thing with not just my error handling, but just my overall strategy for how well the website is working and in terms of being able to respond to customer complaints, is in the session, I keep track of the last, I think I'm currently tracking the last 20 page requests that the customer does.
Oh.
So a lot of times if
you have a session, have a session variable or that tracks that, so you can see what their navigation through the site was and how they got to the error.
Correct. So if you're doing anything like an MVC where everything goes through just the central controller, it's just a matter of setting up the session variable and then just each page request pushing in what that was. And, if it's over 20, pushing out the last one. And then that, not only do I drop that into my error handling, we push all our users to a single contact page like most people do. But if you don't do that, you're missing out on being able to do a lot of cool stuff, putting a lot of cool information into the emails that your customer sends us. So if they send me something and say, your site search sucks, I can't find what I'm looking for, I can go right down into this debug and say, well, here, I can see what their searches were. And I can see, oh, you misspelled the word you're searching for, you idiot. And I can write back to them and say, okay, well, that's not how you spell that word, and that's why our search can't find it. I'll say it a little nicer. So I can actually see what they were doing that's causing them to have problems on the search. And then likewise, when I'm looking at if there was an actual error that occurs, I can kind of see these are the steps that they took prior to this occurring. And a lot of times that is such critical information to have in terms of why things occur on a website. But yeah, if you have a site that uses like searches, like you have an e-commerce site, that can be such critical information in terms of helping your customers out. And then the other thing I dump into every customer email is their shopping cart. And that again can really help you out if you're trying to debug why their checkout isn't working. A lot of times that's related to what's in their shopping cart. So by having that information in there, just automatically for every customer email, it saves us a lot of back and forth with the user trying to figure out what's happening. And if they're logged in, I'll put in all their contact information, their address and stuff like that. So yeah, anything about the user is going to be helpful for me to figure out why things are not occurring properly for them is helpful. And it's very helpful for the support staff that generally handles these emails. I don't generally always deal with customers directly, but I will generally screen a lot of the ones that come through for webmaster type issues, login issues or problems checking out, things like that.
That sounds a great way to do it, because otherwise you have to be asking the customer for this info and they wouldn't remember it anyway.
Right. Yeah. Again, customers are useless to help you debug your website unless you can convince them to get on a conference call with you where you can open up your developer console. Most of the time, they're just not going to be any help with these kinds of full stack applications that we do. All they can tell you is it doesn't work. And that's generally what the emails you say, usually along with a "your website sucks" kind of comment. So that's my goal. And a lot of times if I'm, doing a new website for a client, they love when they're doing stuff as an admin and something goes wrong. And before they even notify me, I email them and say, I saw the error that came through and it's fixed. You're cool. So they don't even have to let me know about it. And a lot of my clients just don't even let me know about errors because they know I'll be on top of them. So it really helps with your client communication so that they don't have to try and explain what's happening in terms of the errors that come through.
Right. So what you mentioned, you also have some SQL Server error logging. Tell us about how you do that.
Yeah, this is just a small thing that I'll show in my talk where we've had some issues with, to be honest, we still quite haven't figured it out. We use stored procedures a lot, and we had to make a change with a particular stored procedure. We kept getting this really bizarre error where it would seem to be still running the previous version of the stored procedure. And we went round and round. Was it ColdFusion causing it? Was it SQL Server causing it? We couldn't figure out where the problem was occurring. And the only way we could determine whether this error really was occurring for the users or not was to start logging, create a log table in our SQL Server, and then during our stored procedures actually log what was occurring. And we still don't know why we get the error. All we know is that it's not actually happening for the user. We still get this error, and I just ended up trapping it and ignoring it, and it's been happening for like a year, and we still don't know why. But by logging it, we could see that the SQL Server was getting the correct data. It was completing the insert or the update that we were asking it to do. Just for some reason, SQL Server returns this error to us regardless. And we even tried renaming the stored procedure to something new, and we still get the error. So it's the most bizarre.
Wow.
We've had SQL Server experts look at it. It's crazy, but the logging allowed us to track the problem, and we've continued to use that for other things where we need to kind of see what's occurring. We've had some issues with our checkout where there's this really crazy shipping process, and sometimes you would get like a null value you didn't expect to get. So we use this logging table to log the steps of the checkout process and where each of these shipping variables get set. And then if we get an error, we can go into the log table and see what exactly happened, which was the variable that wasn't set properly, and so forth. So it's definitely very useful in terms of if you're getting kind of cryptic errors or errors in your store procedures that you aren't really sure where they're occurring. It's very difficult to debug those sometimes in terms of, if you're getting an error, like, you're getting a null value for a variable inside your stored procedure and you don't know where that's occurring. It's fairly easy to debug it yourself. If you're running through, you can, print out the variables. But if it's happening on a live site and you're not able to replicate it, this gives you an additional tool to figuring out how that's happening.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. If you have a ColdFusion app that you don't have time to maintain, TerraTech's ColdFusion Revive service is the answer. And now back to our podcast.
So basically you just have an insert statement into the log table somewhere in the stored procedure. And that's how you're logging it. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. That's great. That's a really clever idea. So, and I assume it just puts also any other info you have, like the date and time. And I don't know that you don't necessarily know the IP address of the client in this case.
Yeah, not unless you're
passed into the store procedure.
Right. No, just generally date and time. And whatever you pass into it, you can log it. If we're using it for multiple store procedures, it will put in the name of the store procedure that's running, so we know all that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then what about things like slow queries or deadlocks? Do you log those in some way as well? Or?
No, Fusion Reactor does a pretty good job on those in terms of checking for that kind of stuff. And that is a tool we're generally using on all our enterprise sites. Really can't beat that too much. Yeah, I mean, there's these other tools that we're starting to look at for some of this full stack monitoring and reporting, what we call application performance management tools. Can do some of that as well. But we're just kind of starting to dip our toes in on those. So I'm not sure I would.
Well, we'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk about the tools for full stack management in a moment. But tell us, you say you do have some strategies for debugging errors on live sites. Tell us a bit about how you do that.
Yeah, again, that's where we're relying a lot on the BugSnag, as well as emailing out of errors that occur. I think we pretty much kind of covered that in terms of what we're doing on live sites, the logging of what users are doing in terms of a page tracker, an Ajax tracker into the session, so that we have more information on what the user is doing. That's pretty much.
I was hoping you had some magic method that would pinpoint the line of code causing the bug.
Well, for people that aren't familiar with source maps, that's my number one hint. If you are doing your JavaScript logging, if you're a good developer, you have all your files minified on production. You will absolutely drive yourself bonkers trying to debug those if you aren't using source maps. So BugSnag does support the use of source maps. Basically what a source map is it's a non-minified version of the file that sits on the server as well. And then there's basically a mapping that tells something like BugSnag, okay, my minified file, here's the unminified version of it, the source map. And then BugSnag will show you the unminified version in its error reporting, and it will have the line of your error if you get a JavaScript error. But if it's minified, obviously the line is always 1, so it's not exactly helpful. So source maps is a great tool to use when you're using a system like BugSnag that's going to log all those JavaScript errors so that you're actually able to debug where the error occurred in the code. And of course, you can have those for your CSS files as well. And we're looking at integrate. I have a tool called, what's my tool? I'm a Mac developer, and there's some nice tools that do these source maps automatically. The tool that I use on the Mac is called CodeKit. It does all my Sass compile, and it can do JavaScript minification and generation of source maps all automatically. So it's a great little Mac tool. I'm not sure exactly what's available out there on Windows, but the other thing is if you use a build server like Jenkins, is you can build these kind of processes into your build server as well, your minification, your compile processes, so it just makes those automatically. So that's my big hand in terms of debugging live JavaScript bugs. Obviously, our ColdFusion error handling, that's all part of that in terms of what it gives us. So that's not a big issue. That's all in all my dumps that I generate in terms of those. The other thing that I'll show in my presentation that we kind of ran into is, so I'm creating this big giant structure of all my pages and then all the Ajax calls that are happening and then all this additional data about my user. It's this big JSON nested structure, and I'm sending that out to BugSnag. Unfortunately, BugSnag just prints it out like a big piece of text. So it's really hard to make sense of it in terms of having this big nested structure with arrays of objects and stuff. So what I do for my ColdFusion errors that get logged out to BugSnag is when I go to do this notification, I also copy that JSON to my server. And then in Bugsnag, it actually has a URL that takes me to a little JSON display. What would you call it? It's like one of those tools that you can drop your JSON in, and it generates the whole little message structure for you. So that's what I did. I took one of those tools, I made a copy of it that sits on the server, and then you just tell it the file to show, and it brings it in and gives you the whole little nested structure that you can open and close each part of the structure. So it's a neat little way to get an easy to read version of that big JSON structure that the bug handler system doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know it from a piece of text. So that allows me to kind of make it readable. And I'd love to do that for my JavaScript errors as well. I'm just not comfortable with generating that many files all the time. There's obviously some performance hit to doing that every time there's an error. And unfortunately, I've had people that have said they've seen fewer JavaScript errors on my site than just about any other site because of this work that we put into taking care of our errors. But you still just cannot get away from getting a lot of JavaScript errors with all the different browsers that hit your site. And the amount of JavaScript that we do, there's always got to be those little annoying bugs that they're not really causing any problems. They just get them. So I don't do it for JavaScript errors, but it's very handy for the Fusion ones so that I can read those JSON structures. And I use that tool for other stuff too. Once you have it, it's really handy to just have available. We use Solar Search on our website, and so if I'm having trouble with something indexing properly in Solar, I can just drop my JSON structure into that tool and read through it that way.
That's great. And that lets you navigate through the JSON structure, I'm guessing? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Or
it just displays it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's for navigating through it. You can expand and collapse the different parts of it, basically.
So any other tools you use for error logging, either open source or third-party ones?
Not currently. I think I've mentioned pretty much all the ones that we've used. I have used, if you're familiar with BrowserHawk. BrowserHawk's a great tool for testing different application requirements on the browser. And they also have a JavaScript error notification that you can use if you subscribe to their service or use their product. It doesn't do a lot of error logging, but it does allow you to create your own notification system or logging system for JavaScript errors. Does a pretty good job. So that was what we initially started with, was the BrowserHawk one, and then we found Bugsnag, and it just gives us so much more. That's what we use now.
And then what about the CF log tag or Logbox? Those are two other things I know I've heard of people using for logging, but I didn't hear you mention them. I just wondered if there was a reason.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason is I got to go on the server. That's a pain in the butt. I don't go on the server. I will use it occasionally for some things. I generally am only using it for like scheduled tasks to log that my scheduled tasks are occurring, or things that I don't need to check very often. But if I have some kind of problem, I want to go see if they are occurring or not, I'll use the CF log for that. But in terms of the error handling, I won't be able to just do that without having to mess with getting on the server and looking at stuff. Particularly since I have to kind of remote these servers a lot of times. It's a hassle. So,
right. And then, I've heard some people using Logbox for logging because it doesn't have to go into a database. If you're using Docker containers, can be useful because you might not have access to the database in that container. So.
Right. Yeah. I've played with Logbox a little bit, but it's not something I've got a whole lot of familiarity with. I mean, a lot of the idea behind my presentation is get people thinking about this. There's definitely all kinds of different ways to accomplish it. And what works and what I need for my applications or for my clients might not be. I mean, I do a lot of e-commerce. That's kind of my particular forte. So there's certain things I do for e-commerce sites that, you know, like the page tracker that is so important for e-commerce sites. It may not be as important for other types of sites. So it's more just to get people thinking about what are they doing and can they do a better job of this? Are they even bothering with emails for errors? Do they pay attention to those? Do they know what kind of errors are occurring on their sites? And you know, a lot of times if you're not even looking at the error logs, you don't know what's going on. Because customers they just don't tell you a lot of times when there are problems on site. They go somewhere else.
Well, and I find that if I let the errors keep on happening, it makes it harder to, you know, I try and, you know, if someone says, oh, these are not important errors, but the problem is they get in the way of seeing the ones that are important.
True.
So
yes.
I always think it's best to like get rid of all the errors, even if they're quotes not important.
Right. Well, and that too, like I said, it really means a lot to your clients when they see that you're taking care of those errors and staying on top of them, because that means that you care about their site and how well their site is working.
Right.
You know, versus them having to complain about it, them having to figure these kinds of things out. You know, when you're able to say, you know, oh, I noticed this error came through, I took care of it. You know, that's showing them a care about their site that really can help with getting them, you know, trusting that you're really working hard to keep their site working as good as possible.
Do you proactively tell people you fixed errors even if they haven't told you manually? Because you know their IP address, or are you not?
End users, no. I'm generally doing it unless they've actually written and complained about it. Then I'll let them know when it's gotten fixed. And it depends on if the client is having me do that webmaster type of interaction with clients. A lot of them with customers, a lot of them don't really want you emailing their customers, or they want you to CC them in. I'm talking more about admin actions where your actual paying client has an admin section on the site that they use for doing admin type actions. If I see an error come through from something they were doing, then yes, I will email them and say, I noticed that problem. I took care of it. It should work fine now.
Cool. Now, you mentioned earlier that you use the analytics to help with tracking down and fixing some errors. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, again, this is because I do not always necessarily log all of my errors. And also there are some errors that are more like, you know, again, we're doing searches on the website, so it may not necessarily be an error so much as a problem. So we use both Adobe Analytics as well as Google Analytics, and there's a lot of ways. Obviously, all these types of analytics site will trap statuses, so you can see your 404 errors for one. You want to keep track of those. If you're hitting a lot of 404s, we do a lot with e-commerce sites. You don't want to ever lose customers. So if if you're doing a big rewrite on the site where your URLs are all changing. On an e-commerce site, you need to have redirects in there. You can't just say, well, Google will figure it out eventually. You know, you got to put redirects in there. So after any big relaunch, we always are tracking those 404 errors and making sure we've hit all the redirects we need to do. And likewise, you know, people will post stuff in forums that might get to your site in some way, and you might not even know about those URLs. So you might think 2 years down the road, I can get rid of these redirects. Those logs will let you know that now there's still sites out there that are directing users to your site. So, you know, we keep, you know, just things like 404s can really matter, a big deal to particularly to e-commerce sites. You need to keep track of those. I'll log all my ColdFusion errors in my analytics. So again, that lets me easily keep track of how many are occurring. Likewise, JavaScript errors, I can actually do if you're familiar with Adobe Analytics, you set up what are called EBARs or events. I can log an event for every ColdFusion error that occurs or every JavaScript error that occurs. Depending on what type of JavaScript error it is, it may not allow you to continue to hit the analytics. But then I look at things like search errors. And I want to look at if my user ran a search, did they get any results back? So I might set up a particular event for searches that didn't return any results. And then another one I often look at are how well is my search working? Do my users have to search like 3 or 4 or 5 times before they add something to the cart? So I want to see real low numbers for analytics like that so that I know my search relevancy is working really well. So there's a lot of different ways you can use analytics to look at the performance of your site, not just errors, but just problems. You know, if a customer's got to search 5 or 6 or 7 times on your site before they put something in the cart, they're probably having trouble finding things, and you might need to look at that.
Well, that's a smart way to do it, Mary Jo. So you mentioned earlier you use some full stack application performance management tools. Can you tell us which ones you use and why you use them?
Yeah, okay. So these are new products that are becoming even more popular in enterprise sites as we start getting more and more layers to our applications where, you know, things like the client-side layer is becoming more important to us as we use more of these client-side tools and, you know, Angular JS sites and stuff where a lot more of the code is happening on the client side. But what's really cool about these tools is they generally are going to monitor and report on every layer of your stack from the database layer to your application layer, your server layer, your client-side layer. It's going to do everything. And a lot of times the pricing is not really too bad for these compared to what you might think there would be. The one that we've really been looking at is called Dynatrace. A couple other really popular ones. Cisco has bought out one called App Dynamics that is available as well. And you generally are you know, paying for how many different little plugins you need for it. So with ColdFusion, you know, there's a Java JVM plugin that it uses to monitor the ColdFusion layer. And what's really awesome about it a lot of times is that you can specifically search for a particular user, and it can be either IP address or in the system if you log your like user ID that's associated with them, or if you, a lot of times you'll have a cookie for your user or something like that. You can track a particular user and see everything that is happening for that user. Their database interactions, their ColdFusion interactions, all their JavaScript, everything that happens. And you can actually track them as they're moving through the site and everything that's happening in the whole full stack for that particular user. So it's an incredible tool for helping to debug issues when a client reports a problem. You know, if they're having trouble out, you can see exactly where where in the checkout process things were happening. Was it a database timeout? Was that what happened? Or was there a JavaScript error that occurred when the data came back from the database? Or, you know, did ColdFusion hit a bug or something that didn't get logged for some reason? It's all in there. So it's really an incredible tool that I think a lot more enterprise sites are going to start using because it can be used by both the developer as well as the actual, you know, customer or customer service people even can possibly use it to track issues.
Cool.
It'll do a lot of reporting as well. So all kinds of reporting on how your application is performing, so you can see slow performing pages. It'll report on things like that. As you know, what's nice about it is that everything's in one place, so you don't have to go one place to find out, okay, I got to go to my analytics to see, you know, how my searches are performing. I got to go into Google Analytics, see where all my slow pages are and things like that. You know, where are my 404s? It's kind of everything in one big tool. So it's really, really worth looking at for your enterprise level clients.
That sounds really exciting, Mary Jo. So good luck in your talk at CFobjective. I've got a few more questions I'm asking every speaker. So first one is, why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
Proud to use ColdFusion. I think it's just still a really fun product to work with. I mean, I've been doing it pretty much my entire adult life as a developer, and I certainly work with other products, but it's still my first love, kind of, that I still really enjoy working with. And we tend to get a lot of different clients that I'm able to really improve their websites, get them working better, and getting them running a lot faster and error-free, and that just makes them happy about ColdFusion too, because a lot of times they're being told that ColdFusion's the problem, and we can show them that it's not the problem. There's so much that we are able to do for them to get their sites running fast and well, and that makes me really happy.
Great. So, what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive this year?
Excuse me?
Some people have said that ColdFusion is dying. They've been saying this for so long, it's a little hard to believe. But what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive this year?
Even more alive? There just isn't enough outreach to developers. I really wish Adobe would do more to reach out to new developers and bring more developers in. Because that's in my mind just the biggest problem, is that because there is that conception out there, we don't get a lot of new developers unless they're they have to do ColdFusion for a job or something. There's not a whole lot of developers that pick it up, and I would just like to see more outreach from Adobe in that respect, in terms of letting the community know we're still developing it, we're still making it a great product, and we want to bring you guys on board. Outreach at colleges and stuff, that kind of thing.
That's a suggestion. So what are you looking forward to at CFobjective this year?
Well, I'm thrilled it's in DC, frankly, because that's where I worked. That's where I learned ColdFusion. I worked for so many years. I grew up in Maryland, so I'm just really excited to get to go up there, visit family and friends and all. Yeah, I haven't gone to CFobjective in a couple years, so I'm really going to enjoy going to a lot of the other talks as well.
Great. So if folks wanted to find you on the internet, how would they do that?
Well, I will say that after my last talk at CFobjective on error handling, I started working on a series of blog articles. I don't maintain a blog myself, but my CEO at CF Web Tools, Mark Kruger, does maintain a CF blog that I will send my articles to and have them posted on. So you'll see my articles show up there from time to time. I'm certainly on Twitter under Jo Sminkey, although I'm rather political, so I probably should separate my ColdFusion Twitter stuff and my political Twitter stuff, but that's me. I just throw everything into one big bucket, and of course I'm on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, CF Web Tools is my company, so you can always find me through them as well.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
ColdFusion Alive. Thanks for subscribing on iTunes. Look for your next episode soon.